Alright guys, is SCHD a scam? Did investors invest in a bait and switch? So if you guys invested into SCHD thinking that it's gonna beat inflation for you, hate to break the news to you guys, but you got baited. But Dividend Sensei is very optimistic about SCHD. This is what he noted.
So if 13% historical returns are expected to continue, 15% in annual income growth. SCHD is trading by 13x earnings and 8x cash flow. He also mentioned safe yield, strong growth, and amazing value, which means 15 to 16% annual return over the next decade. And guys, that is way over optimistic.
Does anybody else smell a snake oil salesman? I am not as optimistic as Dividend Sensei, but I really think that with SCHD, whether it's a bait and switch or not, it really depends on your age, where you are at in life, whether you're just starting out in the workforce or whether you're retired. But in this video, we're gonna talk about how to play SCHD in this inflation crazy environment that we are in right now. And I'll just tell you that you can't take anyone's word for anything. You have to do your own research. You can't even take my word for anything. But I swear there are some parts that Dividend Sensei mentioned that I rather do agree with.
So if you look at the diversification of SCHD, they actually have really good diversification in that in their top 10 holdings, each of them basically have like a 4% risk cap, which means that their holding constitutes about 4% of the entire portfolio. Sector breakdown is also pretty well diversified with things in financials, health. There's no one sector that is overexposed. And lastly, we also see low turnover that is reflected in the very low expense ratio that SCHD has.
Now, the parts that I don't agree with Dividend Sensei is that he said that SCHD had consistent annual income growth. I don't agree with that at all.
So remember earlier, Dividend Sensei mentioned that SCHD had very strong income growth, but that's not really true. If you take a look at SCHD dividend growth here year over year, there's actually basically very sporadic growth. I mean, sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down, sometimes it stays flat. So you can't really believe everything you see on internet articles. Another thing you have to take a look at is the price chart. Now we're looking over the 5 years here, and since 2021, when they printed a lot of money for COVID, we've basically hovered around the same price zone for over 2 years. So does that indicate strong growth? I don't really think so.
So you might have noticed something very interesting in that everything around you has gotten more expensive. And what's even more fascinating for me is everyone around me, all my friends, are keeping the same but now more expensive lifestyle, whereas their salaries all stayed the same. Now my decision to that response was to cut back on everything. My lifestyle is not the same anymore. That's because everything has gotten more expensive. Inflation is not 2% anymore. Now it might have been 2% prior to COVID, but after COVID, with all the money printing, you might find that a lot of things aren't the same prices and they've inflated by more than 2%.
If you take a look at the annual dividend yield for SCHD, it's about 3.45%. It hovers around there. But the problem is that inflation is not 2% anymore. In fact, most consumer categories, inflation is in the double digits, except for milk for some reason. That deflated. And the sad thing is that SCHD invests in large caps. And the thing about large caps is that growth for large caps, it's really hard. So simply, they just don't grow enough. So it doesn't make sense for me to see Dividend Sensei suggesting strong growth in SCHD. It really feels like he's selling something.
Now here's the good thing about SCHD, which may make it not a bait and switch. It is invested in depth. If you look at its holdings, you will find that a big part of its portfolio is invested in non-healthy consumables. Take a look at the Pepsi, take a look at the Coke, and don't mind all the oil companies, that's not good for anyone. And then a part of its portfolio is invested in health consumables and big pharma. That is, once they get you sick, they're gonna get you by buying the pills that make them feel better temporarily. And we all know that obesity is a plague to America. Health problems is a plague to America. And it's just fascinating because just the other day, while I was out biking, I saw a woman taking out her trash, except she took her trash to her car and drove to the trash bin, which was 10 feet away from her apartment unit. So in that sense, what most people don't see is that the game that SCHD is playing is that they're investing in companies that basically make people sick, and then they invest in companies that sells the solution to that sickness. And that way there's a flywheel of profitability, except that the solution is temporary, so they keep you coming back, because if you don't come back, you're going to die, right? And as long as they're profitable and they're investing in these large cap companies, many of which pays dividends, that is the way that you're gonna get rich. Now, if you want more insight into similar kind of game theory where SCHD is basically investing in these flywheels of health, profiting off the health of Americans, then please check out my last video, Invest in SCHD or Bitcoin, a bet on woke America.